Before we start today's show, we just wanted to take a moment and give a huge thank you to the podcast sponsor, StreamYard. With StreamYard, you can stream directly from your browser, create a broadcast, show comments on screen, and see all of your comments in one place. With StreamYard, you can record HD video and audio. You can even go live with pre-recorded videos. Save, rewatch, and download past broadcasts. You can invite guests to your broadcast from any device. StreamYard makes it easy to run interviews, talk shows, podcasts, and so much more. You can simply get started with your own by heading on over to StreamYard.com. Now, without further ado, brought to you by Mindful Media Productions, you are now tuned into my favorite podcast, The Archives with Adam. Here is your host and my grandson, Adam.
Welcome back to another episode of The Archives with Adam, where we bring everything from my brain to your ears. Now, today we dive deep into the worlds of gaming, entertainment, and beyond. I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's episode, as we have a very, very special guest who needs literally no introduction to the fans of the Halo franchise. He's the voice behind the iconic multiplayer announcer whose booming declarations have echoed through countless battles in the Halo universe, from double kill to killing spree. His voice has become synonymous with the voice, the whole multiplayer segment of everything. With the adrenaline-pumping action of Halo's multiplayer experience. Joining us today is none other than Jeff Steitzer, affectionately known as the voice of God to Halo fans worldwide. With a career spanning decades in the world of voice acting, Jeff has lent his talents to numerous projects, but his work on Halo has cemented his status as a legend in the gaming community. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam, very much. That's very kind. All those things you said was very kind. I appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure. So in today's episode, we'll definitely be diving into your experiences with the Halo announcing world,
sure,
as well as behind the scenes magic of creating those iconic lines and learning more about your illustrious career as a voice actor. Now, I just got to say one more thing to my viewers. Grab your energy swords, load up on your battle rifles, and get ready for an episode packed with nostalgia, insights, and maybe even a few exclamations of killing frenzy along the way. Without further ado, let's jump into the fray with Jeff. Jeff, I actually want to start off real quick. We know you all from Halo, but you actually lent your voice to Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5.
Well, I don't know if it was 4 and 5. It was one of the ones, I can't remember which one it was. Vice City Stories? Was that
Correct,
one?
number 4.
I think so.
Yep.
Now, it may seem strange that I can't remember some of the things I've done, but it was a very small role. I appeared with 3 other actors in, when you're driving around in the car, you've got a radio and you can turn to different stations, and one of the stations allows you to listen to old-time radio mysteries. So that was the one that I was involved in, and I played 2 characters. I played kind of a chief of police in this small town, and then I played this fisherman, Pete. I think his name was Pete. He was a fisherman, and we stood at microphones just like they would have done back in the 1930s and 40s, and we did it all the way through twice. And that's what they ended up using in the game. So that was hysterically fun. But I've been doing, it's interesting. I've been doing voice work for games, for a long, long time. I first had an audition for a game. This is going way, way back, Adam. A game called Phantasmagoria. And I didn't get it, but I thought, I should know more about games, and the only way I can do that is to get a computer, but I didn't know how to use a computer, and I had always thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to, figure out computers. I'm sure they're way too hard for me. So I got a computer, and it wasn't hard to figure out at all, and I started playing games just so I would know, what it was all about. And then I started getting auditions for games, getting cast in games. I did 3 games that were pretty well known from a company called Humongous. Freddy Fish, Pajama Sam, and Spy Fox, I think it was. Star
Okay.
Fox, Spy Fox, something like that. And I did a game called No One Lives Forever, and its sequel, No One Lives Forever 2, Aliens versus Predator 2, maybe. Did a bunch of, Motor City Madness for Microsoft. There was one called The Russian Front. I don't know, who that was aimed at. History people who like to, invade countries. I don't know, but did that. So I did a bunch of different things, and I love it. I mean, it's, I love doing voice work because, it doesn't kind of matter, how you're feeling or how you look. As long as your voice is working, you're going to have fun, and I always do. But there's no question that the big deal one is Halo, of course.
For sure. And I'm sure you hear all the time about Halo. That's why I kind of wanted to mix it up. I'm like, you know what? I knew I recognized his voice from somewhere else, and it was Grand Theft Auto, which is
Was it?
just a huge, it's just a huge franchise next to Halo and everything that Bungie put out in 343. But
Right.
yeah, she played Agent Bernard in the Grand Theft Auto 5, and then Pete Banbury on the Gordon Moorhead Rides Again radio station.
That's it. Wow. Very good. Yeah. Anyway, it was kind of hysterical because, as I say, it's one of those things, as is true of almost every game I've been involved with. Nobody tells you anything. You don't know a whole lot about the whole game unless maybe you're Steve Downs. But even then, I've got a feeling that there were some things that surprised him when it came time to working on the game. Lots and lots of curveballs thrown at us, but it's all part of the fun.
Definitely. And see, you were most recently here at the Washington State Gaming Expo, and I did not know until I heard your voice come over the intercom.
Oh.
I was like, I was sitting there, I was at the gaming booth just playing Madden with my girlfriend, and I was just like, I stopped just to hear it, and then it was your voice, and I'm like, no way, like, you're here. And my girlfriend's like, who is that? Because she doesn't play Halo.
Right.
And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, we have Call of Duty's announcer, but it doesn't compare to Jeff Steitzer's Halo Voice of God multiplayer announcer. And I had to literally break it down for her when we got home. I'm like, this is why I freaked out. This is my teenage years, So a lot of people know your voice is that, it's an iconic voice. But what was your initial reaction when you learned about the role from Grand Theft Auto? Do you remember that far back when they,
from Grand
pitched
Theft
it to
Auto?
you? Correct.
Or
when you had that, because for Grand Theft Auto. So when you
Grand Theft Auto,
that,
I was living in New York. I went to New York in 2004 just for a change of pace and a change of scene. I was getting a little disgruntled living here in Seattle. I felt as if everybody had made up their minds about me and had decided, who I was and what I did. And I went, and I'd done a little acting in the TV series of The Fugitive, and I loved it. And I thought, I've never really thought about going down to LA, but maybe I will. I'm going to go to LA. And, I know some people down there, the ones who had been involved with the show, and they all seemed to like me. And, I thought, well, I've got friends down there. So I was going to go to LA, and I happened to mention this to a friend in New York, and she said, oh, don't go to New York. I mean, to LA, come to New York, and you can stay with me for a year, no rent. And I thought, oh, well, okay, I guess I'm going to New York. That fell through. Bit of a sore point, but I ended up staying, as it turned out, with a friend of mine that I've worked with in Seattle on a musical, a guy named Brian Yorkie. Brian Yorkie is one of the authors of the Pulitzer Prize-winning musical Next to Normal. And that hadn't happened at that point yet. And as it turned out, because of the way our careers were going, generally when I was in the apartment, he was out on the West Coast trying to get, TV and movie work. And when he would come back to New York, I'd be out in the regions doing, a role somewhere at some regional theater. But in the case of Grand Theft Auto, the way that came about was I just got a call one day saying, "You've got an audition for." No, I take that back. I don't think I auditioned. They just said they want you for this game. And it was like, oh, okay. And I didn't, as I say, I didn't know anything about it. So I went down, and I remember it was in a part of New York that I love because it's down close to where the Strand bookstore is, one of the great bookstores. It's a huge, huge store. And I used to spend a lot of time down there. It's down by Union Square. And so is the studios for Rockstar, which were the people who produced Grand Theft Auto. So I went in, and it was one of those things. It took maybe an hour to do entirely. And again, depending on the kind of thing you're doing, I've certainly had sessions that lasted longer than that. I've had some that lasted shorter, but it was just great to be in a studio again. Now during all of the same time, Halo was continuing. And for some of the games, I think I had to work on them when I was out of town. I don't think I flew back to Seattle to do it. I think they just set me up in a studio in New York. I remember at one point I was acting in a show in Hartford, Connecticut, and they needed me to do some pickups, some changes. So, they arranged for me to go to a studio. It was very strange because I was able to borrow the company car that we got to drive around, and I drove to, I followed the GPS and parked, and there was like this little tiny studio. I barely could see where it was. And I walked in, and they had me come in, and we were on, speakers and stuff to each other. And I was talking to the folks on the West Coast, and we did the work, and I think it took 15 minutes, was all. So it all changes. But Grand Theft Auto was an interesting thing because I kept thinking, boy, I hope this, turns into more of this kind of work for that game. Because as you say, it's one of the big ones. It really is.
It is, without a doubt.
I'd love to do more games. That's the best.
I bet. I definitely wish I could say that I've been in, a recording session and things like that. Unfortunately, I can't, but I hear so many stories about it. And I'll have Rob Wheathoff coming on here very shortly. I'm not sure if you know the name, but he's from Red Dead Redemption, John Marston.
Oh, very cool.
Yes. Which is another Rockstar game.
Expo as well?
I did, and we talked, and I nerded out, man. I tell you what, I had to tell my girlfriend, I was like, for Christmas, I want Red Dead Redemption. They remastered it, but for the Switch. And she's like, why are you so hung up on this game? And I'm like, well, it's my favorite Rockstar video game. It's different, and just the way it came out was really amazing. And so he was a last minute addition to the expo, and I was like, no, we have to go. He was, wow. Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So we went down there, and I was like, man, who could I talk to about you being on my podcast? Like, I have to have you on. And we exchanged info. And so, yeah. Fun fact, because we were talking about New York, where he was at when he filmed he did the voice, lines and stuff for Red Dead. He spent 2 years in New York doing that.
Wow.
So when you told me it took a little bit of time for you, I was just like, wow, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it didn't take that long, and part of the fact, one of the things about certainly working on either the Grand Theft Auto or any of the games that I did in Seattle was that I was living in those places. It was so easy to go to work. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's been true of all the various iterations of the Halo game. Whether it's in Bellevue, Washington, or whether it's in Kirkland or wherever it is, Redmond. I think we did one there as well. We've been all over the place with the recording of the game. It's just a short drive, not hard to get to at all. And then, then you're there and you get to meet people you haven't seen in 4 years. That's about how often they bring you. And it's like, okay, it's been 4 years, time for another game. Although I don't know what's going on, but I happened to ask somebody. There were a couple of folks from 343 there, and they kind of hinted that there was maybe something in the works as far as the game was concerned, but they wouldn't tell me anything. It's like, yeah. I'd love to know. Anyway, yes, it is great, great fun. And I'm sure you'll hear the same thing from your other guest, to be
Oh,
sure.
without a doubt. Without a
Yeah.
doubt. So I hear you mentioning Washington a lot. So I'm currently in Renton. That's where I live. Are you Washington based?
I am, yes. I'm not from here originally. I'm not a native
Yeah.
Northwesterner, but I moved here in 1975 and have mostly lived in the Seattle area ever since. There was a year that I was at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis as a directing fellow, which was very interesting. I've directed and acted all over the country, so I've been in and out, for various stretches of time. And then when I went to New York, it ended up being for about 6.5 years. And I did a couple of Broadway shows. I was in Mary Poppins. I did Inherit the Wind with Brian Dennehy and Christopher Plummer, were my fellow actors in that. And then, just did a bunch of other things while I was there. I did my Law and Order. So I feel good I got that, checked off the bucket list. But I keep coming back to Seattle. It's hard not to, because as you know, it is an absolutely gorgeous place to live. Today, for instance, was staggering. It was just so pretty and warm.
Yes.
It's really getting to be spring here. So yeah, I mean, I was originally from South Dakota, and then after a year, my folks moved to California, and I lived there until I was 11. Then we moved to Iowa. That was kind of a culture shock. And I was in Iowa, and then I went to school for a couple of years in Minneapolis, and then went back down and finished my schooling in Iowa, and then got in a car and drove out to Seattle to visit a friend, the same friend who said to come and live with her in New York. and and I auditioned for a theater company, and that's how I sort of ended up getting based here. And I've been here more or less ever since, with brief time away for various jobs and visits and stuff. I've got friends everywhere, so I love to go out and visit with them.
There you go. What do you typically like to do? What's Jeff Steitzer like to do around Seattle, Bellevue, all those places? What is
Well,
your interest here?
I love driving around. I just love driving around. Do you know what I mean? And then taking roads and going, I wonder where that goes. Well, when I wonder that, then I tend to just go, well, let's just find out. So I'm pretty good at navigating my way around the area. And there are so many amazing things to discover. Like right now, I'm living in Mill Creek. Well, I'm sure you know where that is. It's up by
Yes.
Linwood and Bothell. And
Yep.
for those people who are listening to this who have no idea what I'm talking about, they're all various parts of the Seattle area. And I love to get in the car and, take back roads whenever I can. And, it's like, well, let's just go to Kirkland today, or maybe we'll go to Issaquah, or maybe we'll go to Snohomish. There's a great coffee place there, and it's so pretty up there, sort of at the, beginning of the mountain range, or the hills, I suppose. And I love going up to Skagit Valley. I've got friends who live in Camano Island, and I visit them all the time. And I go to Mount Vernon, and I go to Anacortes, and I go to Oak Harbor, where I've got friends. I love the thing I haven't done for many, many years and hope to get under my belt again this year is I want to go back up to Vancouver. It's been years across the border and gone to Canada. I really want to go again. But I
I've
just
never been there.
Are you serious?
Yes, sir.
What?
Yes, sir.
What? No, that makes no sense at all. You got to go there.
I've never been.
For no other reason. It's just like here, but completely different in that, for instance, they've got candy bars, but they're all different and they're better, for instance.
Yeah.
And all their products, it's one of those things. It's a little bit like when you go in the country, if you've ever gone down to the South, they have all these stores that are like QFCs, but they've got totally different names. It's like, what? This is a grocery store? It's like, yeah, Wegmans is up north, then that's a big deal too. Huge stores. And it's fun to sort of see the way other people are living, I think. But Vancouver is just spectacular. it feels international in a way that I didn't used to think Seattle did. I don't know how I feel about that now, but
Gotcha.
Vancouver is very cool. You got to go.
Gotcha.
It's 3.5 hours away is all. It's only 3 hours, actually.
I've
Get
actually
your
made some
passport.
yeah, I don't have that either, but I definitely need to. But I've
Yeah,
definitely
get your
doing the
passport.
podcasting. I've made some friendships and things like that. So a couple of the guys that were on the old Cartoon Network show, Ed, Ed, and Eddie, said, "Whenever you're up here, let us know.
Oh my God.
We'll hang out with you." So I'm like, okay, I have to. I've
You
been
have to.
finding the right time. Yes.
Absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So
great.
I definitely want to jump into some Halo, because I know that's what a lot of my viewers are expecting. So
Sure.
again, your voice is recognizably, it's very recognizable for Halo fans worldwide. And you can hear it now just talking to you. I'm just like, man, this is the guy right behind that voice. How did you originally become involved with the Halo franchise as the announcer?
It's very funny because, people say, did you know about Bungie and stuff before you went out? And it's like, no, far from it. I had no idea what this was. None of us did. None of us did. We had no idea what we were getting into. And I remember I got an audition. My agent called and said, they want you to audition for a game out in Microsoft. And it was like, oh, okay, great. So I drove out, for my time, and I parked my car and I went into a booth. And the fellow who was one of the sound designers was the person who I think was doing the engineering. And so the way that they had you audition was all the women did Cortana, pretty much Cortana. I'm not sure if there was any other female character, maybe Halsey, although Jen does both of those. And then they also had to be, scream like they were Spartans being killed. And for the guys, everybody read Master Chief. And then I seem to remember I read an Alien as well. And then we all had to scream as well. And the screaming came at the end of the audition because Marty O'Donnell told us later, he said he knew that if people did that first thing, they'd they'd fry their voices screaming and stuff. And then when it came time to audition for the big stuff, there'd be nothing left. So that's how it happened. Well, I went away from the audition the way you do for most auditions, going, thanks, that was fun, thinking, it's never going to happen. Then I got a call a couple of days later from my agent who said, they want you to play Master Chief. You got the job. And it's like, really? Okay, great. Didn't think anything more about that. I thought, well, I'm sure they'll call when they want me to come in and record. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And all the other people I knew locally who were going in to work in the game, like Jen, who is also from Seattle, or David Scully, or Ken Boynton, who were all in the first couple of games, they'd all been in. And I called, actually, Jen at one point, and I said, so have you done your recording? And she went, oh, yeah, I finished it weeks ago. And it's like, huh. So I got in touch with my agent, and I said, it might be a good idea to call and find out what's going on, because something I think is going on. She called me back and she said, well, I've got good news and bad news. This is exactly what I remember her saying. The bad news is they've decided, I guess Marty had felt, I mean, he's talked with me about it recently, and evidently he says he hadn't made up his mind. So that my agent, Topo Swope, had jumped the gun. Maybe. She had suggested that he had gotten cold feet about giving something that was so important to the game to an actor he didn't know. He thought the actors he was seeing were terrific, but he didn't know us very well, and he didn't know how it would work out for the long haul. And so he'd already brought a couple of people in from Chicago, and he decided to reach out to somebody he'd worked with once before, a guy named Steve Downs. So that's how Steve ended up becoming Master Chief. But they said the good news was, according to Topo, was they want you to be the announcer for the game. And I thought, that's good news, being an announcer? That doesn't sound very interesting. Because one's notion of being an announcer is kind of like, And then today we're going to be really tedious. Well, it didn't turn out to be that way at all. I went in to record it, and I didn't know what we were going to do. And Marty didn't really know what we were going to do either. So he said, well, why don't you start off and do a little reading, like do Monster Truck Rally? So he was like, okay, and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And he said, okay. He said, now pull that back a bit. And he said something, I think the way I remember it, he said, what did you do with that alien? Add a little of that as well. And it's like, oh, the alien was a little bit like this. And, and so we fiddled around, and before you knew it, we were ready to start recording. And it was like, okay, now we're going to start with all these different lines. And it's like double kill, triple kill, overkill. And it was like we were off and running. And the only thing about it was, I remember for some inexplicable reason, I guess I was unaware that they could actually, if they'd wanted to, they could really do heavy effects on my voice. So I thought, oh, I've got to make the voice like really low and very sort of. So I was doing it way in the back of my throat, which is the worst thing you can do as a voice actor. So I was really down here doing all the announcing and stuff. And my memory, again, and it could be fallible, so many things I've discovered, that I think I remember perfectly or not, was that it took several days of recording. So that by the time it was over, I was like, I could barely speak. But then we finished, and it was like, great, thanks a lot, have a good life. And I waltzed away and went on to other things, probably acting on stage or directing, or I don't remember what I was doing. And about 4 years later, I get a phone call from my agent going, hey, they're doing a sequel to that game you did. And it's like, really? I said, it did well, huh? And she was like, I guess so. We were so naive. And so I went in and I worked on Halo 2. And it was after that game dropped that I finally saw something in a newspaper, like in the New York Times. It's like, Bungie's Halo makes $175 million in its first day in the US alone. And I went, what? What? I had no idea. But then neither did Marty, neither did Steve. Steve tells a great story about he was at his house and his son was playing with his friends, was playing Halo. And apparently his son said to him, it's like, Dad, do you play Master Chief in this? And he went, oh, yeah, I think maybe I do. Again, completely unaware of what the success of the game had been.
Yep.
Marty said that when they put it out, they had thought that if they, what did he say? It was like if they had sold 80,000 games, that would be a major success. Well, they did a whole lot better than that with the game. But I mean, there was so much stuff going on that nobody ever told us. Have you heard the story about how Tom Cruise and Julia Roberts almost ended up playing Master Chief and Cortana?
I never heard that story. No, sir.
Yeah. Well, what happened is that after the first came out, it was a big deal. And a lot of people were crazy fans. I think Spielberg was one, which is why he's now involved with TV series, because he's always been a big fan of the game. And all these agents down in Hollywood were putting up their clients saying, it's like, hey, Tom Cruise would love to play Master Chief. And, Julia Roberts would love to be Cortana and everything. And Microsoft got a little excited about that. So they went to Marty and they said, we could do this. We could like swap out, these nobodies that were in the first game and bring in stars. And Marty thought about it because he sort of needed to. And he said, I think that's a bad idea. He said, I think the reason the game is so successful is because of these people. And so Microsoft said, okay. And we kept our jobs for the most part over the next couple of years. There were a few hiccups along the way, but yeah, that's what happened. Isn't that wild?
I couldn't imagine. Yeah.
No. I mean, it was like, well, and in fact, I have to say, even though I've just told you the story about how I thought I was originally going to be Master Chief, when you hear Steve Downes, it's like, oh, for God's sake, Well, of course, it's got to be Steve. He has that incredible voice. Finish the fight. It's like, oh, I remember that's one of the things I think they told us. It's like, make him like Clint Eastwood, so he was kind of, you wanted to get that kind of a thing going there. But I can't remember what I did exactly. But I mean, you didn't tell Steve that. Steve just has that, he's got that voice. It's so great.
It's funny that you mentioned Clint Eastwood, because another guy who kind of started out doing some voice acting out here, John St. John. Do you know that name?
I don't think I do.
He's the
I am
voice of Duke
woefully
Nukem.
ignorant of so many of the other games that are out there.
Gotcha.
One of the great things about going to expos and conventions is I'm meeting all these people who are in huge games. I mean, all these Pokemon people were in the tables pretty much right next to us, and I got to meet them, and it's like, cool,
So John St. John, he's the voice of Duke Nukem.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I've heard of. Yes.
Yes. So he was explaining to me, because he came to Seattle to do some recording. And he was explaining for that voice, they wanted him to sound like there was another guy, but then they said, well, make it sound more like Clint Eastwood. And so that's how we kind of got the Duke Nukem, which is another one of my favorites. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then Kenny James, he played Bowser, which you probably got to meet him while he was here at the Gaming Expo.
Briefly,
he did some recording. He did some recording here as well. So, and he's from Washington. So,
oh yeah, that's right. He said he'd been in Lakewood or someplace. He told me where he'd been. Like, you're kidding. And there was somebody else who was here who was with some other game who had also started out in Seattle. It's like, wow, that's cool.
And that's like, well, I was like, hold on, you're mentioning Seattle a lot. Are you in Washington? I didn't know that. But I also knew Halo is obviously from, Microsoft.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So
in fact, Marty moved here and lived here for several years while they were doing the game. And I think it was only when they had the big, dust up over at Destiny, when that all blew up, that's when I think he left. And I don't know if he went straight to Las Vegas, but that's where he is now. He lives in Las Vegas. I don't know why.
Gotcha.
Hot.
Yeah, that's
different. Gambling, if you like that, I guess.
True. So yeah, for me, growing up and playing Halo, it wasn't my number one game, but it's a part of my teenage years. Call of Duty was more of my forte, but I would play Halo, but I was terrible at it because I'm so used to aiming down the scope and things like that. But I had a friend in high school. His name is Giles Miller. He would invite us over literally to just terrorize us on that game. Like, this guy was pro level good. It was insane. And that's probably why I never really got back into it.
Yeah.
Like I probably really should have.
Yeah.
But the Halo multiplayer announcer voice, it could either be a good thing for people or a bad thing if you're on the other end getting demolished like that. But it has become the beloved character. It's become a beloved character in our, in its own right. How did you approach voicing the announcer to convey the excitement and intensity of the gameplay? Because I could tell you have a great pride in that voice.
Well, it's interesting because, again, here's the dark secret behind my participation with the game. I never knew what was happening in the game or what I was saying at all. They would just say, okay, this is, we're going to do a countdown here. And, it would be like 30 seconds remaining, 20 seconds remaining, 15 seconds remaining, 10 seconds remaining, 5 seconds, 1 minute remain. It was going on like that. And it's like, well, that's pretty simple. You just sort of get more excited about it. That was often what they would say. They would have to explain it to me. I will never forget it. Was it the second game? I came in and I'm reading stuff and it's like, I'm getting to zombie killing spree. And I went, wait a minute, excuse me. Are there zombies in this game? There were things like brains, stuff like that. It's like, what's going on here? And they went, I said, you want to tell me about it? And they were like, no. So it's like, okay. Jen and I are very, very good friends, and we've gone out, and she'll start talking about things and like, oh, there are these things that they're having me do in the game. And it's like, what? What are they doing? It's like, oh, I can't tell you. Because we all signed NDAs. And it's like, Jen, it's me. I'm not going to tell anybody else, which is probably not true. So she knows better than to, give me any information. But yeah, I mean, it's really the people who are in the room. There was no director per se. What you had, it was generally a 2-person team, as I recall. It was the engineer, who for the first 3 games or so was my buddy Jay Windland, whose wife I directed in a play here in Seattle out at the Village Theater. And the writers, one of the writers would be there. And basically I would walk into the booth, and in the earliest days, before we had little TV monitors that I could read from, I would have a pile of paper, and I would pick up a page, and I would just read down the page, and I do 3 versions of every line, phrase, word, whatever it was, So if you're doing like blue team go, blue team go, blue team go, whatever, and they go, okay, and then I just go on to the next one. We do it in sections, and then they'd say, okay, go back to line 4. Let's do 3 more. It was not like, they might say go a little faster, because I did tend to. I was somewhat notorious for being, I'd want to just pull it out and go. So, and they go, Jeff, try it a little faster. It's like, okay, double kill. It was hysterical. But that, that was what, and they would say, it's like, okay, now here it's really exciting. And here it's even, when they went through the medals, it's like, this is a bigger medal. This is the biggest medal, So you want to reflect that. And it's like, okay, it's one of the reasons why when I say unfriggin' believable, it's like unfriggin' believable. Because they said that's like a big deal. And, when you get that, and it's like, okay. That's how that all came about. It's not because I knew anything about what was going on in the game. I didn't actually even get to play the game until around the time I think of about maybe 3, because they would give us, every time we finished the game, they would send us like the little cartridge, for the Xbox. And I said, well, thanks, but are you going to give me an Xbox too? And they was like, no. They, and it's like, what? Now I've got 2 kids. They were small at that point, relatively small. And I'd already spent a good amount of money on an actor's salary to get them I think it was a Nintendo and a PlayStation. I think we had both. I was a very indulgent father. And, but then out comes Xbox, and it's what, $350 or something. It's like that, it's that or rent. So, we didn't have it. So I got the games. It was only later when I was over visiting some people, I was blindsided for a supper, and they said at the end of it, do you want to go downstairs and play some Halo? It was like, oh, fuck. Okay, sure. How hard can it be? I found out. Like you, it's like, oh, man. And they would just, it ended with them just blowing me up over and over and over. I had to listen to myself saying, game over, to me, over and over and over again. So anyway, I'm not a great player of the game. I mean, I don't play very well, but I have played.
So you understand my pain. You understand my pain. I mean,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would try. I would still try, and just get down, have some fun, spend time with my siblings, and yeah, I just wasn't the Call of or the Halo person. I was more like a Madden or Call of Duty guy. So
I was more
it is.
I'm more of a open up a book because that's about my speed. I would sit and I'd watch young people on their phones, doing all this stuff.
Mm.
And I'm like, you know, letter by letter typing out stuff. Going, God, I hate doing this on a phone. It's really hard. I got my big old fat fingers and just terrible. But yeah, I mean, kids, all the younger people like you, and even younger people are kind of amazing because I watch people play the game and it's like, how do they do it? I have no
Oh, yeah.
idea. It's just incredible.
So
And
how
it's
do you
really,
balance going to school?
yeah, it's really fascinating. It's really pretty
Yes,
cool.
I would say I would call a lot of people no-lifers at that time. It's like, how do you manage school? How do you manage work and then go home and just master this game? Kind of like when COVID first hit, Animal Crossing, just seeing all these people's islands and stuff. We're just like, I thought my island was cool, but
Yeah.
no. Yeah. So, um, what was it like knowing that your voice has become such an inaugural or integral part of the Halo gaming experience for many, for millions of players, like even including family and friends? Like, when did it hit you at that moment?
Once again, it was relatively late in the progression of the games. I would say maybe around the time of 4, maybe 5. I mean, it really was down the road, probably 4. And what happened is that every once in a while, somebody would recognize me by my voice. And they would say, are you the guy that does the voice of the announcer on Halo? And I go, yeah. And the response was always like, some people were like, whoa, my God, I got, and, very demonstrative. Other people I've literally seen people avert their gaze. They couldn't look me in the eyes and they would start literally shaking. And I thought, what? I didn't understand what a phenomenon this game had been. I mean, I knew it sold a lot, but I didn't realize what it had meant to so many people when they're growing up. Then I started doing a couple of things. First of all, I started doing cameos. And a lot of the people who come to me for videos, a cameo is a personalized video, came because they had played Halo. Some of them going all the way back to the very beginning in 2001. And the thing I heard over and over and over again, I know other people in other games hear this too, but I started hearing it from people saying, you were the voice of my childhood. And it's like, wow, really? Wow. And then I started hearing from people things like, this is for my best friend. We met when we were playing Halo. Or in some instances, it's like, this is for a friend of mine who lives, I've never met them in person, but we stay in touch playing Halo every weekend or something. There are people who said, my dad got me started playing the game. Or there have been a couple of people who said, my mom got me started playing the game. And there were other people who would have these big LAN parties, where they go into the computer lab at school. They'd hook themselves all together and they would play in the computer lab. I mean, it was amazing to me. It was so clear that this had more, pardon the use of this word, reach than anything else I've ever done, just by a long shot. And the thing that has been the most amazingly gratifying is just that, what it's meant, the friendships, that have come from this and have managed to stay together. There are people who are still playing it all the time. And you think that I've never done anything else that has been as important to people.
Definitely.
So it's a very, very cool thing. There have been a couple of instances that I haven't quite known what to do. There was one person in Phoenix. He came up to me and he told me a story, which is basically that he had come from a family where, when he was young, he had been very, very severely abused by a parent. And he said the only thing that kept him going was being able to go to his bedroom and play Halo. And I listened to the story and I was horrified, first of all, because I think that, mistreating any child is, you should be shot as far as I'm concerned. Because kids are helpless. It's just so unfair. They don't have any power. So I was horrified by his story. And I said, well, you're not still at home. And he went, no. As soon as I could, at 18 or whatever it was, I was gone. I was like, I'm so sorry that you had to endure that. And he asked if he could hug me. And I said, of course, but it's one of those things. It's like, he was very emotional just telling me about it. And I've had that happen more than a couple of times. And you think, this is really wild. I think we very often don't realize how people get through their lives and how sometimes it can be very hard. Some of us are very fortunate and sort of blithely go our way. I've had my ups and downs, but the downs have been, pretty minor compared to so many people. So yeah, I'm just very, very conscious of what a privilege it is to have been involved with this game. And I think everybody feels the same way. I know Jen has had stories that are very similar, where people were just so happy to meet her because, she'd been a part of their lives in the same way. Steve Downs, the same, it's cool.
Oh yeah. Now we met quite a few of you guys at the gaming expo, and I mean, it was just a great time. I mean, we had to make sure we had met Mark Thompson and my girlfriend Adam right on the UPS picture, bend and snap, and she said that's like my favorite line, and he seemed to really enjoyed hearing that because a lot of people know him from Halo, right?
Sure.
But we got to chat with Jen as well and Steve.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm working on getting Steve on the show. I've been working with his person, but I know she's out right now. So fingers crossed that happens. I've been trying to find a way to get Jen on because I think it'd be awesome to talk with her. But I'm working on it, so we'll see. But I know we're getting close to time now. I want to just ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
And then we'll call it at that. But can you share? So you shared like a memorable moment with like a fan, but do you have any memorable moments or experiences from your time working on the game that stand out to you?
Yes, there is one that I always think of immediately. I was working on, I think it might have been the second game. And I was now you've got to understand that in the olden days, I would go into a booth that was about the size of a small closet. And, you'd enter by way of a door and that would be closed behind you, which sealed you in, keeping things quiet because you don't want any room noise or anything from the outside getting in. So it was a studio. And then in front of me, there would be a music stand on which my copy, my words were. And then beyond that, they're very close, there was a window. And through the window, you could see this other room that was a little bit bigger than the one I was in. And that was where the engineer was sitting at his console recording everything, and where the writer was who was going through and making notes of stuff. And so we'd gone in to start recording, and they said, oh, Jeff, we just wanted to let you know there's a chance that somebody might be dropping by. They'd like to watch you work. Would that be okay? And it was like, well, sure, I don't care. It's like, yeah, I'm a voice actor. It's not, it's not hard. Sure. So what I was doing, I was reading my way down the page, right? And I'd read my way down and I got all the way to the bottom. Then I looked up and they'd say, okay, great. Now let's go to the next page. And I was reading my way and I was going all the way down to the next page. Remember, there are two people beyond the glass. And like after a couple, minutes of going through this or however long it was, I look up and suddenly there are like 12 people in this little room in front of me. And it takes me a second to register that the person who was directly in front of me was Hayden Christensen, who had just starred in his first Star Wars movie.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just like, okay. Well, so what happened was, I didn't leave the booth. He didn't leave there, but we sat and we chatted for a little bit, and I congratulated him on his success, and he told me how much he loved the game, and after a while they said, okay, well, we should probably let you get back to work, Jeff. And it's like, okay. And so I started reading again, and I read down the list, and when I looked up, it was only 2 people in the room. Everybody else had taken off. And they were showing him around the place. They were trying to get him to do the game, because if they couldn't have well-known people in the major roles like Microsoft had wanted, they wanted to get as many of the big voice names, and even people who weren't necessarily known as voice actors. They wanted them to be in the game as well. I think it's around that time that Keith David got involved in the game, and Peter Dinklage did something in the game, and all these other people. It's like, what? I'm not even aware of some of the folks who were in, but it was like, oh, they got a lot of, people that I would recognize from having seen them on TV or film or whatever, to play Spartans or aliens or whatever they were. It was really kind of cool. But yes, so that was like one of the very memorable things, primarily because it was the only time I was observed, and it was fairly memorable.
That's insane. I enjoyed hearing that. Yes, I mean, Hayden is like, that's huge, man. That's crazy.
It was very interesting because
no.
those films came under so much. They were not necessarily well reviewed, and it's like I thought he was perfectly terrific in the film and stuff. And then later I saw him in a great movie called Shattered Glass.
Okay.
Really, really good. And then, of course, like so many people, his career kind of went into the deep freeze for a few years, and now he's back, and it's like, oh, good. Brendan Fraser, who won the Oscar a year ago. I know because he was a student at Cornish College, and we actually ran into each other. I was in London leading a tour when I was running ACT in Seattle, and he was there doing voice work on, is the film called Basho, about a dog? He was like Basho or something like that. And we bumped into each other at the theater and made a date to go out, and we ended up spending time together. And he was pitching ideas for plays he could do at our theater, which he never ended up having time to do, but it would have been great. And he's one of those people who for a while was in the wilderness as far as his career was concerned. And then he came back with a vengeance. It's like, had he changed? Had he lost his talent? No. Had he suddenly gained new no, he was the same guy. He's a really sweet guy too. I mean, I don't know what all the stuff was about, but he was good.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely. I mean, I'm glad he got his flowers when he did, because people, when somebody passes away, that's when they tend to praise the person, But now Brendan, he deserves it.
It's great. He's showing up in all sorts of things now, which is wonderful.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I know my girlfriend will kill me if I don't ask, but did you ever meet Keith David while doing any of the Halo
I've never
stuff?
met Keith. No, not only have I never met Keith, I would love to meet Keith David. I'm a big fan. But I didn't meet Steve Downes until 2020.
What?
Yeah. Well, we never do anything together in the game. Steve didn't meet Jen until the 3rd game. They were interacting in the game, but they didn't, because he was doing all of it. Well, that's the way it is. I know you've heard the story of like the movie people, the Hollywood folks who are like, doing these big movies together, but they're never actually in the studio together. They got somebody else reading that's what happens. So it's like, I never saw Jen work. So in 2020, right before the pandemic, I mean, literally a week before everything shut down, I go out to Kirkland to do recording for Halo Infinite. And I walk in, and there's Jen and Bruce Thomas, and they're both wearing the pajamas, with the little dots all over them and stuff because they're doing motion capture. And standing, at a bit of a distance watching is Steve. So Jen, I think, introduced the two of us, and it's like, oh, it's so good to meet you. But that's first time we'd met. And then during the
That's
pandemic,
crazy.
we did some Zoom things, so we had a chance to, he was mean about the whole thing because he was in his home down in Florida, and he would make a point of being out by the pool. It's like, you bastard, you bastard. We didn't have a pool here in Seattle, and it wouldn't have been nice to go outside anyway. But it was very, very sweet. He's a great guy. Great guy.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I got to meet him as well, and yeah, no, I loved every minute of that. So yeah, next question you probably get asked all the time. Do you have a favorite line or catchphrase from your work as the Halo announcer? And if so, what makes it special to you?
I always loved Kill-tacular. And I also loved unfrickin' believable, which originally was frickin', not friggin'. And then when 343 came in, they changed it to friggin'. So a lot of people say, can you write unfriggin' believable? And it's like, well, it's not unfriggin' believable. It's unfrickin' believable. And the reason I like frickin' better is K's are thought to be, by people who do comedy, funny letters. A K is a funny letter. Pickle is a funny word because of the K. So unfrickin' believable always made me chuckle, because it was sort of meant to be this like really tough sounding guy, but I giggle about the whole thing. So I love that one. And I love Kill-tacular, 2 Ks in that as well. The other one that I love was a line that never got into the game, sadly. And it's Cheney Mania, which I love. You know the story of that?
I don't. I've heard about it, but that line, but I've never heard of it.
Well, very, very quickly, what happened was some years ago, Dick Cheney, who was the vice president, was out hunting with friends, including Merrick Garland, who's the head of the Department of Justice, and he shot him in the face accidentally.
Yes.
So they decided, the folks who were working on the game thought it would be hysterical and it didn't happen every time it happened. It was like once every 10,000 times you would hear me say that. But if you ended up shooting one of your own teammates, then you might once every 10,000th time hear me going, Cheney Mania. Well, what happened was, that was fun. We were all roaring with laughter. We thought it was hysterical. Evidently, somebody farther up the food chain at Microsoft was like, no, that is not in the game. And it was like, oh. Later they told me it's like, it's not in the game. And it's like, what do you mean it's not in the game? There were a couple of things like that where it's like, oh, I like that line. So that's one of my favorite lines, just because I like the story that goes with it.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're telling me that, because I never knew that.
Yeah, that was never heard in the game.
Oh man. So we're down to the very last couple minutes. I want to ask you finally, like, what message would you like to send to the Halo community and fans that have supported your work throughout the years?
I cannot begin to thank the fans of this game sufficiently for their support, their love, their devotion, their passion for the game. Every time I meet somebody and they talk about what the game means, it reminds me of the way I felt when I was a kid. And I lived in Southern California, as I mentioned, in San Diego, and I went to Disneyland the year after it opened. And I was a huge fan of all things Disney. I saw all of the movies, not just the animated features, but the live action features. I watched Disneyland. I watched Mickey Mouse Club. I read the Disney comic strips in the paper every day and every Sunday. I was obsessed with Walt Disney, read about him, read biographies and stuff. And I never had a chance. I always thought, if I could only meet him, if I could only meet Walt Disney, or, if I could work for Walt Disney. That was never going to happen, sadly. But so when I hear people who feel that way about Halo, it reminds me of that. And it's one of the reasons why I try to be as available to fans as I possibly can be, because I am so aware of the fact that if it weren't for all of them and you and everybody, this game, I say it all the time in the cameo things, it's like the game would not still be going on. They're the ones that have kept the game alive. We've just been lucky enough to work on it, but they're the ones that keep this whole thing rolling. And hopefully it will keep going. I certainly hope so. But yeah, that's what it is. And also, just the joy of hearing the stories about what it's meant to people it blows me away and inspires me. You don't generally get that in my profession. You don't hear from people. You might get applauded at the end of a play, but it's just this large noise. You're not face to face with a single individual or a couple of individuals, who are talking about what it's meant to them. So it's incredible.
Of course. Well, I definitely appreciate you taking some time out of your night to talk with me. It's been a pleasure having you on, having some laughs, hearing all the amazing stories. And I'm just so thankful. I'm hoping I can meet you again in the future and bring my Halo Funko. I goofed up. I forgot it. And that was one that I definitely needed to get signed, was that one, and have a line on it. But
it's not a problem. Let me know. We can figure out a time.
Sounds good. No, definitely. But yeah, no, I'm so thankful for you coming on, and any of our viewers that listen, please show this man some love and go buy a cameo. He takes great pride in this. So no, Jeff, I greatly appreciate it, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Absolutely. Adam, thank you so much. This has been a delight.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to take a moment and thank the podcast sponsor, StreamYard. Without StreamYard, none of this would be possible. I also want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching this episode, whether you're streaming it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or watching on YouTube. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for many more episodes.